Greetings, fellow explorers. This is Tony with Fount Systems Network, and we're here in pursuit of low-carbon innovations for seawater desalination. Today I have a special episode, rather the first of two special episodes. I'll be interviewing Jonathan Walters. Jonathan Walters is currently an energy economist working as a consultant, but for much of his career he was a director at the World Bank, which is how I found him. You might remember, if you look at the link above, I did a review of the World Bank's 2012 Renewable Energy Desalination Report for the Middle East North Africa region. Jonathan commissioned that report. If you're new to Fount Systems Network, I'm going to post a link here, and you can see where we are in our process. And if you like what you see here, please like and subscribe. Let's get started. Thanks for joining this morning. I do appreciate your time, and you'll be a great resource, and you'll be a great kind of conversationalist around this subject of low carbon solutions to seawater desalination. Although I know your kind of field of expertise is much broader than that.
Yeah, well, I'm more of an energy person who sort of strayed into water and desalination. Well, partly by accident, but partly just because working in the Middle East and North Africa, it's an obvious avenue to pursue, to look into. So I'm not a desalination or water expert. I'm an energy economist, basically, yes, who got into energy cleanliness, if I can call it that, at a certain point in my life, and that's been my passion for many years.
So on the 2012 report, before we kind of dig into the subject of that a little more, do you want to spend a few minutes just kind of telling us what you've been working on lately?
Oh, okay. So I was in the World Bank for, well, longer than I care to count, maybe. I was in the World Bank actually for 26 years. And I took early retirement 5 years ago, 2014, a bit more than 5 years. And I've worked since. I mean, I do research and I do some consulting work. Broadly speaking, in the areas that I was working on in my last, 10 or 15 years in the World Bank, namely renewable energy and climate change mitigation and climate financing. With a strong focus on the Middle East and North Africa, because it's a region that I know and love and have worked on for 15 years or so. Though I work on other parts of the world as well, and sometimes on global issues. But most of my work is about renewables and energy storage and climate change policy, strategy, and so on, and I do that in different ways. Branching out a little bit from the Middle East and North Africa, I've recently been doing some work with the World Bank in Greece, helping to advise the government of Greece and the regional government of Western Macedonia in Greece on how best to transition away from a dependence on coal, on lignite, which is mined in Western Macedonia principally, and then there are lignite power plants next to each of the mines. And so the issues were not only about the energy transition away from lignite, I mean, what would be the alternative sources of energy supply, but also perhaps more fundamentally about what about the jobs? What happens to people who are either working in the mines or working in the lignite power plants, or are leaving school and had been expecting to be taking up those jobs, or had been expecting to take up jobs that were somehow indirectly dependent on the income generation from the mines and the power plants, because as with many parts of the world that produce coal, the local towns or the local region become heavily dependent economically on coal. So even if you work in a restaurant, your customer's income is mainly derived either directly from coal or derived from other people who derive their income from coal. So one way or another, it affects just everybody.
It seems like it brings a kind of a whole ecosystem of economic activity with it, whether it's services directly related to coal, engineering, equipment, consumables.
Right, and in so many different ways, and it makes it so difficult socially and politically. It makes it so difficult to actually transition away from coal, even if many people recognize that from an economic point of view, it's no longer economic. From an environmental point of view, it's a disaster, both local environment and the climate change implications. You've still got real live people whose livelihoods and their kids' livelihoods depend on that source of income. And you've got to figure out how to help them move on to something else, to help create something else for them to move on to. Otherwise, it's not fair, and it's not practical. Particularly, in many coal mining regions, people working in coal did, dirty, dangerous, horrible jobs. Were continually told that they were heroes, and that the rest of the country was depending on them, and so on. I mean, in Greece, for decades, the miners were told the prosperity of Greece and its recovery after the Second World War and the Civil War and so on is because we had this wonderful resource called coal, called lignite, that was cheap and plentiful, and it drove economic growth for the country. Some years ago, I worked on coal transition in Ukraine. This was just after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And those workers had been told for decades, this phrase is going to sound like an incredible anachronism now, but they had been told, you are the shock troops of the proletariat. You are heroes of the Soviet Union. And they were the second highest paid workers in the whole of the Soviet Union. The nuclear power plant workers were the highest paid, and they were the second, above doctors or anybody. And then suddenly they're told, your industry is not economic, we have to shut it down. And
you're not heroes anymore.
Yeah. And they don't, understandably, they don't take it very kindly, and they don't just say, oh, okay, I'm 55 years old, I've got all sorts of injuries and lung disease from laboring in these awful mines since I left school, but I'll just go quietly and I'll become a computer specialist in another part of the country. I mean, that's just not going to happen. I'm going to fight tooth and nail against the closure of the coal industry, obviously.
I think even achieving a transition away from coal, it would seem to me to require long periods of time, but then really deliberate effort on the educational side, on the industry subsidy side, on the legal and regulatory side. It seems to be that there needs to be a variety of government, but also private side cooperation to implement a policy like that.
Sure. No, you need a very comprehensive strategy to address those situations, and you need that strategy to be underpinned by the type of partnerships you're talking about. Partnerships between public and private, between different levels of government, because there's a regional government, central government, and so on. Between trade unions, if possible, and so on. I mean, and those are, as we know from plenty of countries. I mean, I'm from the UK, and I have very vivid memories of the pitched battles between the coal workers and the government in in the 70s, particularly the 1980s. And these things can be incredibly divisive and can leave scars, I mean, social and political scars for a very long time. Afterwards, I would say those areas in the UK that were coal mining areas, the scars are still there, even if the mines closed, 30 or 40 years ago. The communities very much, remember what happened. They remember how they were treated. They have all sorts of grievances and resentments, and there's a political fallout from it.
Yep. I can just imagine that in the middle of implementing, let's say, a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan, the people who have to, the elected officials have to be able to survive elections to be able to kind of see the plans through to completion. So that it seems to me an extraordinarily difficult hill to climb. So what kind of advice are you giving? I don't know if you can share that here, or what solutions or kind of insights would you have to offer?
Well, okay, so there are various things, but one thing that we're saying is in that region of Greece, in Western Macedonia, you have plenty of assets, even if you're not going to be mining coal anymore and you're not going to be burning it in the power plants. You have salvageable assets from having done those things, right? So for example, the lignite is open cast mining. It's not shaft mining, right? So you've actually got large areas of land that can be used for something else, that can be remediated and so on, and it just becomes available when the mining stops. And you've got the power plants that can be potentially converted to using something else, something cleaner. There are different, technologies from biomass or involving solar, photovoltaic, and electrical heaters to turn that into steam to put it through the power plant. And so a large part of the infrastructure and the transmission network of that region, because it has so many lignite power plants, is a real. If you look at the map of the transmission network of Greece, there's a sort of concentrated spider's web of transmission lines in Western Macedonia, evacuating the power from the lignite plants. That's a huge salvageable asset if you can put some other electricity into those wires. Otherwise, you just have to write off, hundreds of millions of euros in assets. And above all, you've got the people who have a collective, huge experience of working in energy, and they switch from working in a power plant that runs off something clean rather than runs off lignite. It's not really a very different job. Most of them, they're still doing what they're doing in the power plant, and it saves possibly all of the jobs, or at least most of them. And you can take the actual lignite mines. I mean, the land that you abandon, you stop mining. You can take that and you can put PV panels all over it. You might be able to do some pump storage hydropower, because you've got sort of varying elevations. The topography is like that. You might be able to put batteries there. You might be able to put other forms of energy. And ultimately, with all those renewables you can put on that land, you may be able to produce green hydrogen as a fuel, as an alternative to natural gas, a non-carbon alternative to natural gas, using renewable electricity and an electrolyzer and water, and turning it into green hydrogen. So part of the future of that region is to switch from lignite to energy storage technologies as a sort of service to the rest of Greece, or maybe even to the rest of the surrounding region, and clean energy provision, photovoltaics or whatever, so that you're using the assets that have sunk cost, you salvage those assets, including, if you can put it this way, the human assets, because you've got people whose identity is to produce energy. You can say to them, well, you can carry on being heroes.
Wow. So that was a really interesting conversation. Now you can see why I wanted to break this into its separate episode. The things that Jonathan is working on are super interesting. If you're like me and you're really interested in the environment, mitigating climate change, transitioning away from fossil fuels, it's very easy to lose sight of the human stories behind that. And so Jonathan's work is a reminder that we have a much broader set of issues that need to be contended with in this transition. So for the next episode, we will be looking at the 2012 Renewable Energy Desalination Report that Jonathan commissioned. And in that interview, we're going to get Jonathan's point of view on what that report might look like if it were commissioned in 2020. If you like what you see here on the Fount Systems Network, please like and subscribe. And remember, everyone, keep exploring, keep growing. I'll see you next time.